So picture this. A guy scams investors out of hundreds of millions of dollars, serves less than 2 years in a comfy prison, and then Hollywood turns his life into this blockbuster movie celebrating the whole thing. This is the wild story of Jordan Belfort, the man who scammed America and then got rich all over again by telling everyone exactly how he did it. And that's really the central question of this whole saga, isn't it? How does that even happen? How does a convicted felon, a guy who ruined thousands of lives, transform into a celebrated pop culture icon? It's a paradox that honestly tells us just as much about ourselves as it does about him. So the court ordered him to pay back a staggering $110 million to the thousands of people he defrauded. Now, that's not just some abstract number. That represents people's retirements, college funds that just vanished, entire futures that were completely wiped out. But for a crime of that scale, the punishment was just 22 months, and not in some maximum security prison either. We're talking a minimum security facility, a place that was probably more famous for its tennis courts than its iron bars. To really get how this happened, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning.
It all kicks off in Bayside, Queens, back in the 1960s. This is where a young Jordan Belfort discovers he has one single, solitary superpower: the art of the sale.
It started out pretty simple. He had a summer hustle selling Italian ices, and at 16, he netted 20 grand. Pretty good, right? So then he enrolls in dental school, thinking that's a solid path to getting rich. But on the very first day, the dean tells the students that if they're there to make a lot of money, they're in the wrong profession. Belfort literally got up and walked out. He then started a door-to-door meat business that, well, it went bankrupt. But in that failure, he had this huge realization. The product didn't matter. It could be meat, it could be stocks, it could be anything. He knew he could sell it. That one line from the dean, man, it just solidified everything for him. He realized right then and there he wasn't interested in some traditional career. No, he was interested in one thing and one thing only: the singular pursuit of wealth.
So after a kinda legit career got cut short by the Black Monday crash in 1987, Belfort didn't see disaster like everyone else. He saw an opportunity. He turned his attention to the unregulated Wild West of the financial market, the boiler room.
And he found his true calling in penny stocks. Now, this stuff was basically financial garbage that any serious broker wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. But they had this one magical quality: a 50% commission. For a salesman like Belfort, this was the perfect product, because the payout was enormous and nobody was watching. And this led to their signature scam, a simple but just devastatingly effective fraud: the pump and dump. Here's how it worked. First, his new firm, Stratton Oakmont, would buy up massive blocks of some worthless penny stock. Then his army of brokers would pump it. They'd create fake hype, make false promises, anything to drive the price sky high. And then, at the absolute peak, they would dump all of their shares for a huge profit, which would cause the stock to totally crash, leaving their clients completely wiped out. This secret was his so-called straight-line persuasion method. See, it wasn't about selling a company's fundamentals or its business plan. Nope, it was about weaponizing the fear of missing out. The entire pitch was designed to bypass logic and go straight for the gut. They never sold the stock. They only sold the dream of getting rich. So with this pump and dump machine just printing money, Stratton Oakmont started to transform. It grew from this humble little boiler room in a strip mall into a full-blown empire of excess, a carnival of greed and pure chaos that would become legendary on Wall Street. And the ascent was just shockingly fast. I mean, in just a few short years, Belfort went from a failed meat salesman to a Wall Street powerhouse, pulling in hundreds of millions and becoming one of the most notorious names in finance. You know, Belfort didn't just build a company. He built a cult. He fostered this insane environment fueled by a potent mix of fear and loyalty. The top brokers, they were treated like rock stars, showered with cash, luxury cars, you name it. But the underperformers, they were publicly shamed and fired on the spot. And running through all of it was just a constant river of drugs, alcohol, and unbelievable debauchery. But here's the thing about an empire built on lies. It's a fragile thing. And as the money and the excess grew, the cracks in the foundation really started to show, not just for the firm, but for Belfort himself. The first signs of trouble started to appear on the horizon. I mean, the sheer volume and just the audacity of their scams began to attract some unwanted attention from regulators. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, started noticing a pattern of suspicious activity and, you guessed it, a rapidly growing pile of complaints from burned investors. And then the walls started to talk.
Disgruntled former employees, guys who got chewed up and spit out by the firm's toxic culture, they started leaking stories to reporters, and pretty soon, these exposés started popping up in major publications like Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, shining a huge national spotlight on the fraud.
All that media attention finally reached law enforcement. An FBI agent named Gregory Coleman took notice, and he didn't just see a few red flags. He smelled blood in the water. He began the really long, painstaking process of piecing together a massive federal case, connecting all the dots of securities fraud and international money laundering.
And finally, it all came crashing down. In October of 1996, Agent Coleman's investigation led to a full-scale federal raid on the offices of Stratton, Oakmont. Agents flooded the trading floor, seizing documents, ripping phones from desks. They shut the whole operation down. The party was officially over.
So, facing up to 30 years in prison, Jordan Belfort did the only thing he knew how to do. He started selling. But this time, the product wasn't a worthless stock. It was information. And his customer, the FBI. And this right here, this is the great paradox of Jordan Belfort's story. On one side, you have the criminal, the guy who defrauded thousands and turned on all his colleagues to save his own skin. And then, on the other side, you have the icon, the best-selling author, the motivational speaker, the subject of a blockbuster film. He didn't just serve his time, he somehow managed to rebrand his crimes into a profitable commodity. And while Belfort was busy building his incredible second act, let's not forget what was left behind from his first. The victims, the teachers, the veterans, the families who invested their entire life savings, they lost everything. And to this day, only a tiny fraction of that $110 million in restitution has ever actually been paid back.
So this leaves us with this final, really unsettling question. Belfort himself once claimed, "I was guilty of being greedy, but so is everybody else." Is he right? Does his story resonate with us not because we're shocked by his crimes, but because some small part of us secretly admires his audacity? Maybe the most disturbing part of the Wolf of Wall Street story isn't what he did, but why we, as a culture, just can't seem to look away.